Hello and welcome back. Today we'll be covering the next portion of the videos, and we're going to be looking at how weapons and projectiles can be introduced into our game. So starting off, I have painstakingly made two new sprites. One, a crossbow, my weapon, and the other, a projectile, just an arrow. So with these two, I'm set to go, and I've got some nice content to work with. Going into our code, we're going to, of course, have to make two new objects at least, create and object. And here we're going to be creating, the first portion is our O weapon. And we will create another object. I'm going to call it arrow. Actually, let me projectile. Because of course in your game you might have anything be your projectile and keep it as vague as possible so that way you can throw in your sprite and have no issues with it. And I'm going to, of course, be using my projectile sprite and my crossbow, my weapon sprite. Now that we have these two things in, I'm going to go ahead and add in our step event. What I want at the basic level to allow our character to have something that they're holding that moves around with them is, of course, referencing our current position. And so with our step event, let me increase the size of this for you. What is the X and Y value for the weapon? Well, I want it to be somewhat based around where our player is. So if I go over into the room and throw this weapon here, this is actually kind of huge. Maybe I'll have to scale it down, but oh well, maybe it'll just look comedically large. I've got this, I'm just gonna throw it over here. It doesn't really matter so long as it's in the room. But ultimately I want it to be somewhere close to where like middle of my chest, like I'm holding this. But how do we get the code to represent that? Well, based off of where my player sprite is and its center, so if we look at the idle, the origin point comes out to here. I would like it to be closer towards the center down below it and maybe a bit over. We need to relate our X and Y positions based off of the player's position. Since I know I'm only going to have one player, we can do O player dot X. Now we're referencing the X value from the player. And I want it to be shifted over a few pixels to the right, so I'm going to add 5. Our Y position is also going to be related to the player, O player, the Y value, and I want this lowered a bit, so maybe 10 pixels down. We'll see how that looks. This should now follow along with the player. We've got no functionality at the moment. It just follows along with the player. We'll need to add in the functionality to allow us to launch a projectile and be able to maybe add a sense of recoil to this. Depends on how we put this together. Again, our game, our choice. So now I can move around. I have my crossbow, my comically large crossbow with me. I'll keep it this way. It looks entertaining. But that's it. It's just walking around with us. It's not switching the direction. It is also not pointing anywhere where my arrow is. If I wanted to include an arrow, maybe I don't want to include an arrow or using mouse interactions. Again, your game, your choice. Let's see how we can start adding in these features. I want my game to include mouse interactivity. So I need to figure out how I can relate the X and Y values for my mouse and make sure that it is pointing the correct position. In addition to that, I need to make sure the sprite's actually looking the right direction as it moves around. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So we can go ahead and put if our mouse check button I'm going to have my left mouse button be my shooting button. Again, you can change it to whatever you want. Your game, your choices. I'm using my mouse button, left click. If the left click has been pressed, then I want to go ahead and cause a projectile to be fired with instance create layer at my X and Y value. And what layer are we going to create this on? Right now, if we go to the room, we only have one instance layer. I do want to better organize this. So I'm going to create another instance layer and rename this. And this will be projectile layer for projectiles. Now back in our code, nope, not the player, but the weapon. This is going to be placed on the projectiles layer. And we're going to place a O projectile. Let me minimize this and increase the size. Okay, we've got a projectile. We're going to create this and we're going to give this some basic information. So that way it can be in operating. So what speed is it going to be going? I'm going to set this to be speed 25. This is just the pixels per step that is flying in the direction that it is looking. What direction is it looking? Our direction is going to be equal to our other image angle plus a little variation. So random range, and I'm going to have it plus or minus 4 pixels, or 4 degrees in this case. But what angle are we looking at? Right now, if I just press it, it'll launch it right now just straight. And our image angle is also going to match the direction. There you go. But we need to make sure our image angle actually gets updated. And so this is everything to do with our crossbow animation and firing. This makes sure we're in the right spot, the right position. We need to make sure we have it at the right angle, or more appropriately, the mouse angle. Where is our mouse pointing at? Our image angle, or the crossbow, is going to be pointing in the direction of the X and Y position of our current crossbow center up to our mouse X and mouse Y positions. With this and updating our other components, if we left click, we create a projectile. In the projectiles layer, speed of 25, looking in this direction, flying there. We should have it going without any issue. And I also want to make sure my crossbow flips whenever I'm looking to the left rather than it just rotating upside down. Let me show you what it looks like before we get to that. Because right now, whenever it rotates around, it will be upside down whenever it looks left. So now I have the game, it rotates along with my cursor, and if I left click and hold it down, we're just launching a ton of arrows. Yeah, it looks comically large. Yeah, I think I'll keep it like this. This is entertaining. But we need to modify a couple of things. First, the sprite, so that way it's not upside down whenever it's over here, but instead it is flipped. And I don't want to shoot this fast. Also, I believe there should be some type of recoil. Whenever I launch these arrows or these bolts, the crossbow should shoot back a bit while I'm holding it. Let's go ahead and add in these elements. So first, the easiest one is flipping the sprite. Let me maximize this a bit. Flipping the sprite. If the image angle is greater than 90 and the image angle is less than 270 degrees, then the image underscore Y scale should just be flipped. Else, our image underscore Y scale is positive. Now, make sure this only, of course, works so long as you've not modified the size of your sprite inside the room. Otherwise, it'll change it back to be its full size. Remember, you're not supposed to be really modifying the sizes in the rooms. You should instead be modifying the sprite size itself, or later on, whenever we have different scalings, that'll be done within the code. So that way we can stay at the 100% to avoid certain issues with how I'm going to approach things versus how you might end up modifying things. Just be aware of that. So flipping the sprite, this will make sure it's pointing and is upright in both directions. Then we don't want to be able to be shooting them just continuously. We're going to go ahead and add a create event. And this sets up just a couple of basic variables that we're going to use. First, I'm going to have firing delay is set to 0, and our recoil is set to 0. And so these are just variables that we're going to be using. These are necessary in our step events. In our step events, going back over here, we need to make sure that I've got recoil included. So our recoil is going to be equal to the maximum of these two values, 0 or our recoil minus 1. And then our firing delay is going to be decreased each step. This is essentially going to be how many steps until we can shoot again. Every step, we, of course, remove one step from the list. Our recoil is going to be the larger of these two. And what the recoil is going to be doing is the recoil is actually a shift. It's going to move our weapon, our crossbow, back. And so we're only allowed to shoot if the mouse check button, we've left clicked, and we also have the firing delay is less than or equal to 0. Enough steps have passed between our shots. And so now the firing delay is included. We're not allowed to shoot continuously the entire time. And we need to include a recoil and a delay. Firing delay. How many steps do I want between each shot? Well, I've got a crossbow. I imagine it's going to take my character a little bit of time to set it up. I'll put 15 frames. We'll see how that looks. Maybe it's too many. Maybe it's too little. Maybe I want to add more time to this. It's up to you, your game. And a recoil. How far back does this shoot any time that you fire a projectile off? I'm going to say 5 pixels sounds good. So the firing delay is now fully implemented. I have a 15-step delay before I'm allowed to fire again. Every step, it reduces by 1. So long as the step is 0 or negative, and I left click, I'm eligible to fire another projectile. Our recoil, though, is still incomplete. While we have the recoil set to 5, and every step the recoil is slightly less, how do I actually get that to be implemented within the game? I need to actually add a shift. X is going to be minus equals the length in the direction X based off of recoil number of pixels and our current image angle. Our Y value is also going to be minus equals length in the direction Y, recoil at the correct image angle. The reason why we have to do this rather than just saying, okay, the X value gets pushed back a bit is because the recoil happens in the direction we are shooting. If instead you did not include the correct calculations based off the image angle, it'll just move every time you shoot 5 pixels left or 5 pixels down, which doesn't actually represent the recoil being in the direction we have fired. So by including this, it'll correctly get pushed back whatever direction I'm looking at. So if I shoot up, it gets pushed back down. If I look lower, it gets pushed back that direction. And now it looks much better. And if I rotate, you see it does flip here. It's in this orientation. And if I go like this, crossing the boundary, it flips and it's still upright. So that way we don't have the crossbow upside down. And now if I hold it down, this is the fastest that I can shoot. I might add in more time to that. It's my game. I think I'm shooting way too fast for a crossbow. Maybe I'll include it to be like 60. But while this is perfectly fine, we're actually keeping the rifle very close to us the entire time. If you wanted to add an element that kind of made it slow down a bit or look like it was slightly delayed, you can change this event. Rather than being at the step event, it could be at the beginning of the step. Now, if we run it, it'll look like the crossbow is kind of following us, like there's a slight delay, and we're not perfectly holding it with our person as we move around and shoot, but it's kind of like following behind us. There's some weight to it. So we see I'm moving. It's not perfect. You see it's kind of off to the side and then it catches up. This, in my case, because of the size of the crossbow, would make sense. It's a heavy item. It's going to slow me down. And yes, it takes me much longer to shoot a new arrow. And so I'm pleased with this. And this slight delay just by being at the beginning of the step rather than with the step is enough for us to be able to see that or add this sense of weight, this mass to our object. We see it slows down behind us. There's just a slight delay behind when everything happens. But yes, that's all we have for this video. If you have any questions or need any assistance in class, just let me know. Otherwise, this is how you add in weapons, and you're able to add in projectiles and get it to follow your cursor, flip to be upright at all times, and have this slight delay, which adds a sense of heft to whatever you're holding. Everyone, have a good one, and I'll see y'all next time.